The hospital bills were spread across my kitchen table like a death sentence written in numbers. $847,000 for the surgery that could save my 3-year-old daughter's life. I stared at them through tears that had stopped coming hours ago. My body had nothing left to give. Outside, rain hammered against the windows of our cramped apartment, and I could hear Lily's labored breathing from her bedroom down the hall. Each wheeze felt like a countdown timer, marking the moments we had left together. They said I had 72 hours to come up with at least half the money, or they'd have to move her off the priority list. 72 hours. That's all that stood between my baby girl and a future where she could run and play like other children, where her lips wouldn't turn blue from the effort of walking to the kitchen, where I wouldn't have to watch her struggle for every single breath. I thought I knew rock bottom. I thought being the family disappointment, the single mother who threw her life away, was the worst label I could wear. But sitting there that night, listening to my daughter fight for air while knowing I was too poor, too powerless, too much of a failure to save her, that was when I learned what true helplessness felt like. The anonymous wire transfer appeared in my account 3 days later, right when hope had completely died. $1 million from a sender listed only as someone who understands. No name, no explanation, just enough money to save Lily's life. And then some. If you're watching this because you've ever felt that crushing weight of being unable to protect someone you love, or if you've ever wondered whether guardian angels really exist, then please like this video and share it. Because what I discovered about my mysterious benefactor changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the price of keeping secrets. Comment below if you've ever experienced an unexpected miracle when you needed it most. I read every single one. My name is Emma, though for most of my 23 years, I've been known by other names. The screw-up, the disappointment, the cautionary tale parents tell their children about what happens when you don't follow the plan. Getting pregnant at 19 while in college wasn't part of my family's carefully orchestrated blueprint for success. Neither was dropping out to raise Lily alone after her father, a boy who promised me the world, disappeared the moment the pregnancy test showed positive. But none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was the steady beep of machines keeping track of Lily's failing heart, and the miracle that had just appeared in my bank account. The Whitmore family, my family, had a reputation to maintain in our Connecticut suburb. My father, Richard Whitmore, was a federal judge who'd built his career on being tough but fair, a man of unwavering principles who believed that people got what they deserved in life. My mother, Catherine, was the perfect judge's wife. Charity galas, country club committees, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. My older sister, Victoria, had followed the script perfectly. Yale Law School, prestigious clerkship, engagement to a senator's son, and my brother, James, was making waves at a top investment firm in Manhattan. Then there was me, Emma, the one who'd tarnished the family name by getting pregnant by a boy from the wrong side of town, the one who'd chosen love over law school, only to end up abandoned and alone, the one who now worked 3 minimum-wage jobs just to keep a roof over our heads while my daughter's medical bills piled up like snow in a blizzard. The last time I'd seen my family was at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I'd swallowed my pride and brought Lily to the family estate, hoping that seeing their granddaughter might soften my parents' hearts. Instead, my father had spent the entire dinner lecturing me about personal responsibility, while my mother fussed over Victoria's engagement ring. James had barely looked up from his phone, and Victoria had made passive-aggressive comments about how some people just weren't cut out for success. Lily had been healthy then, just a normal, giggly 1-year-old who charmed everyone she met. Even my stone-faced father had cracked a smile when she'd reached for his glasses. But when I'd mentioned needing help with daycare costs so I could work more hours, the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. "You made your choices, Emma," my father had said, cutting his turkey with surgical precision. "We all have to live with the consequences of our decisions. Bailing you out would only enable further poor judgment." My mother had nodded in agreement, her pearl necklace catching the light from the chandelier. "It's for your own good, dear. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Victoria had smirked over her wine glass. Besides, it's not like you're the only single mother in the world. Plenty of people manage just fine without running to Daddy for money. That was the last time I'd ask them for anything. I'd rather work myself to death than beg for their help again. But I hadn't anticipated Lily getting sick. I hadn't planned for the moment 6 months ago when she'd collapsed at daycare, her little heart finally unable to keep up with the demands of her growing body. Congenital heart defect, they'd said. Progressive and fatal without surgical intervention. The bills had started immediately. Specialists, tests, medications that cost more than I made in a month. I'd sold everything we owned, my grandmother's jewelry, our car, even Lily's toys. I'd taken out loans I knew I could never repay, maxed out credit cards, started a GoFundMe that raised a pathetic $3,000. I'd called churches, charities, even went back to my family one last time. That conversation with my father still burned in my memory. I'd called him from the hospital, Lily hooked up to oxygen in the background. I'd begged. Actually begged. Please, Dad, I'm not asking for me. Lily is your granddaughter. She's only 3 years old. She doesn't deserve to die because I made mistakes. His response had been clinical, detached. Emma, you can't expect the world to fix your problems. There are payment plans, medical assistance programs. You need to explore all your options. I have explored them all. I'd sobbed into the phone. She needs this surgery, and she needs it soon. The doctors say without it, she might not make it to her 4th birthday. There had been a long pause. For a moment, I'd thought maybe, just maybe, he was reconsidering. Then he'd spoken, his voice firm. I'm sorry, Emma, but I can't reward irresponsibility. You'll have to find another way. He'd hung up, and I'd sat there in that sterile hospital room, watching my daughter sleep, her chest rising and falling with such effort, and I'd felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but my faith in family, in love, in the basic decency of people who were supposed to care about you. My mother had been no better when I'd tried her separately. Your father and I are united on this, Emma. It would set a bad precedent. Victoria and James have worked hard for their success. It wouldn't be fair to them. Even my siblings had turned their backs. Victoria had actually laughed when I'd called her. Seriously, Emma? You expect us to pay for your mistakes? Maybe this is the wake-up call you need to get your life together. James had been marginally less cruel, but equally unhelpful. Look, Em, I feel for you. I really do. But I've got my own investments to worry about. Kids are expensive. That's why I'm not having any until I'm financially stable. You should have thought about that. So I'd stopped calling, stopped begging, started planning for the worst instead. I'd met with social workers about what would happen to Lily when I lost her. I'd written her letters for all the birthdays I wouldn't see. I'd held her every night, memorizing the weight of her in my arms, the smell of her hair, the way she still sucked her thumb when she was scared. The morning the money appeared, I'd been sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee I couldn't afford, but had bought anyway because I needed something warm to hold on to. Dr. Morrison had just told me that Lily's condition was deteriorating faster than expected. We were out of time. My phone had buzzed with a bank notification, and I'd almost ignored it. Probably another overdraft fee I couldn't pay. But something made me look, and there it was. $1,000 are deposited into my checking account. I'd actually laughed, thinking it was some kind of cruel glitch. But when I'd logged into my account, it was real. The money was there, along with a simple message in the transfer notes, someone who understands. My hands had shaken so badly I'd dropped my phone. $1 million. Enough for the surgery, the recovery, the medications, everything. Enough to save my daughter's life. I'd actually run, to the billing office. My coffee forgotten, my exhaustion evaporating like morning mist. The woman behind the desk had looked at me like I was insane when I'd breathlessly told her I could pay for the surgery, all of it, right now. But when the payment went through, when she'd printed out the receipt showing a zero balance, I'd collapsed in her office, sobbing so hard that security had almost been called. Within hours, Lily was being prepped for surgery. The same doctors who'd been gently preparing me for the worst were now talking about recovery times and physical therapy. The surgery that had seemed like an impossible dream was suddenly scheduled for the next morning. I'd sat by Lily's bedside that night, holding her tiny hand and wondering who could have done this. Who had $1 million to give away? Who even knew about our situation besides the people who'd already rejected us? The GoFundMe hadn't mentioned the specific amount we needed. The only people who knew the exact figure were my family members, who'd made it crystal clear they wouldn't help, and the hospital billing department. "Mommy," Lily had whispered, her voice raspy from the oxygen mask, "am I going to get better?" "Yes, baby," I'd told her, smoothing her dark hair back from her forehead. "You're going to get better. Someone very special made sure of it." "Like a fairy godmother?" "Something like that." She'd smiled then, that gap-toothed grin that never failed to melt my heart. "Maybe it was Grandma Rose. You said she watches over us from heaven." Grandma Rose. My father's mother, the only person in the Whitmore family who'd ever truly loved me unconditionally. She died when I was 15, leaving me her collection of first edition books and a letter telling me to always follow my heart, even when it led me away from the path others had chosen for me. My father had been furious when the will was read. He'd expected those valuable books to go to him, not to his rebellious teenage daughter. "Maybe it was," I'd whispered to Lily, though I knew Grandma Rose couldn't send money from beyond the grave. The surgery had been scheduled for 6 a.m. I hadn't slept at all, spending the night pacing the hospital corridors and praying to every deity I could think of. When they'd wheeled Lily into the operating room, her small hand reaching for mine until the last possible second, I'd felt like my own heart was being removed without anesthesia. The waiting room had become my entire universe for the next 8 hours. I'd memorized every stain on the carpet, counted the ceiling tiles, 43, and read the same magazine 17 times without absorbing a single word. Other families had come and gone, their own dramas, playing out in whispered conversations and muffled tears, but I'd been alone. No family to comfort me, no friends who could afford to take time off work. Just me and my terror and my desperate hope. When Dr. Morrison had finally emerged, still in his surgical scrubs, I'd known immediately from his smile that it had worked. "She did beautifully," he'd said, and I'd collapsed into his arms, sobbing against this relative stranger who'd just saved my daughter's life. Lily's recovery had been remarkable. Within days, her color had improved. Within a week, she was sitting up and asking for ice cream. Within a month, she was walking the hospital corridors, her steps steady and sure for the first time in her life. The nurses called her their miracle girl, and I'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we'd finally caught a break. But the mystery of our benefactor haunted me. I'd tried to trace the transfer, but the bank could only tell me it had come from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I'd posted a thank you on the GoFundMe, hoping whoever it was might see it, but there had been no response. I'd even hired a private investigator with some of the leftover money, because yes, there was leftover money even after all the medical bills were paid, but he'd hit dead end after dead end. It was during one of Lily's follow-up appointments that I'd first noticed something odd. We'd been in the waiting room when I'd overheard 2 nurses gossiping. "Did you hear about the Anderson family? Their son's leukemia treatment was just fully paid by some anonymous donor." "Another one? That's the 3rd family this month. Someone's playing guardian angel." My heart had started racing. Another anonymous donor? I'd cornered the nurses, begging for information, but they'd clammed up, citing privacy regulations. But I'd seen the look in their eyes. They knew something. I'd started researching, spending my nights after Lily went to bed scouring the internet for similar stories. And I'd found them, dozens of them, scattered across the country. Families with sick children who'd received anonymous donations at their darkest hour. The amounts varied, but they were always exactly what was needed, not a penny, more or less. And they'd all started appearing about 5 years ago. 5 years ago. The same year Grandma Rose had died? No, that wasn't right. She'd died 8 years ago. 5 years ago was when... I'd frowned, trying to remember what had happened 5 years ago. That was the year before I'd gotten pregnant with Lily, the year I'd been accepted to Yale Law School, following in Victoria's footsteps, the year I'd decided to defer admission to take a gap year, much to my family's horror, the year I'd met Tyler at that coffee shop and fallen in love. But none of that explained the anonymous donations. Who had that kind of money? Who would help strangers but remain hidden? And why had they chosen us? The break in the mystery came from the most unexpected source. I'd been cleaning out my storage unit, one of the few things I hadn't sold, when I'd found a box of Grandma Rose's things that I'd forgotten about. Inside were her journals, decades of daily entries in her elegant handwriting. I'd started reading them to feel close to her, to remember the one person who'd believed in me. Most of the entries were mundane: garden club meetings, family dinners, her thoughts on books she'd read. But then I'd found an entry from a year before she died that made my blood run cold. Richard came by today demanding I change my will again. He's never forgiven me for what I know, for the secret I've kept all these years. He thinks I don't remember, that the dementia has taken everything. But I remember the account in the Caymans, the money he stole from the Morrison Trust when he was their executor. $20 million hidden away while that family lost everything. He thought he'd covered his tracks, but I kept the evidence. One day, someone will find it. One day, the truth will come out. The Morrison Trust. Why did that name sound familiar? I'd grabbed my laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as I searched. And there it was. The Morrison family, once prominent philanthropists who'd lost their fortune in a legal battle 20 years ago. Their executor had been a young lawyer named Richard Whitmore, my father. My stomach had churned as I'd kept reading Grandma Rose's journals. Entry after entry detailed my father's corruption, his theft, his careful manipulation of the legal system to hide his crimes. She'd gathered evidence, account numbers, transaction records, even recordings of conversations. And she'd hidden it all somewhere, planning to expose him after her death to protect the rest of the family from the immediate fallout. But where had she hidden it? I'd torn through the rest of the box, finding nothing but old photographs and pressed flowers. Then, tucked inside the back cover of her favorite novel, Pride and Prejudice, how fitting, I'd found a key. A safety deposit box key with a number and the name of a bank I'd never heard of. It had taken me 3 days to track down the bank, a small institution in Vermont where Grandma Rose had apparently spent summers as a child. The safety deposit box had been paid for in advance for 50 years, the clerk had told me, looking at me over his spectacles with curiosity. Inside the box had been everything. Documents, recordings, proof of my father's theft, and 20 years of illegal activity covering it up. And a letter addressed to me. My dearest Emma, it had begun in Grandma Rose's shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, then you found the truth I've been protecting you from. Your father is not the man he pretends to be. He built his success on the suffering of others, and I've watched it corrupt him year by year. I'm leaving this evidence to you because you're the only one in the family with the courage to do what's right. The others are too entangled in the web of his success. But you, my brave girl, you've always followed your heart over convention. The Morrison family had a son, David. Find him, make this right, and know that I love you, always. David Morrison. I'd searched for him with trembling fingers, afraid of what I might find, and what I'd found had shattered me completely. David Morrison was Tyler. My Tyler. The boy I'd fallen in love with, who'd disappeared when I'd gotten pregnant. The boy from the wrong side of town, whose family had lost everything when he was a baby. The boy who'd grown up in poverty because my father had stolen his inheritance. The pieces had started falling into place with sickening clarity. Tyler hadn't abandoned me because of the pregnancy. The timing of his disappearance, just days after I'd told my family about him, about the baby, my father had done something, said something, threatened something. I'd hired the private investigator again, this time to find Tyler. It had taken him only a week. He's in Boston, the investigator had told me, sliding a folder across the table. "Goes by David now. David Morrison. He's done well for himself." The folder had contained newspaper clippings, magazine articles, business profiles. Tyler, David, had built a tech empire from nothing. He was worth hundreds of millions now, maybe more. And he was the anonymous benefactor. Not just mine, but all of them. He'd been using his wealth to save families with sick children, families like ours who'd been abandoned by the system, by their loved ones, by hope itself. But why hadn't he contacted me directly? Why the anonymity? The answer had come when I dug deeper into the investigator's findings. 5 years ago, right when the anonymous donations had started, Tyler had tried to find me. He'd hired investigators, lawyers, anyone who could help, but he'd been told I was dead, that I'd died in childbirth along with our baby. My father's doing, no doubt. Another lie to protect his reputation, to keep his crimes hidden. Tyler had been mourning us for 5 years, while we'd been struggling to survive just a few states away. I'd sat in my car outside his office building for 3 hours before finding the courage to go in. The receptionist had looked at me skeptically. I was wearing my only nice dress, the one I'd bought at Goodwill for job interviews, and it showed. "I need to see David Morrison," I'd said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." "Mr. Morrison doesn't see anyone without an appointment. You can submit a request through our website." "Please," I'd begged, leaning forward. "Tell him Emma Whitmore is here. Tell him Lily and I are alive." The receptionist's expression had shifted from skepticism to alarm. She'd picked up her phone, speaking in hushed tones, and within seconds, the elevator doors had opened and Tyler had stepped out. He looked different, older, more polished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I'd made in the last year. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once looked at me like I was his whole world, they were exactly the same. And when they met mine, I saw them fill with tears. "Emma?" His voice had broken on my name. How are you?" "We need to talk," I'd managed to say before my own tears started falling. He'd led me to his office, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But I'd barely noticed the luxury. All I could see was the pain in his face, the questions, the desperate hope. "They told me you were dead," he'd whispered, collapsing into a chair across from me. "Your father, he said you'd died having our baby, that there had been complications. I tried to find out more, to attend the funeral, but he said you'd been cremated, that there was no service. I mourned you, Emma. Both of you. For 5 years I've been mourning you." "He lied," I'd said simply. "He lied about everything. Tyler, David, I know who you really are. I know what my father did to your family." His face had hardened then, the vulnerability replaced by something colder. "So you know I'm the son of the family your father destroyed. Is that why you're here? Some kind of delayed guilt?" "I'm here because you saved my daughter's life." That had stopped him cold. "Your daughter?" "Our daughter, Lily. She's 3 years old, and she just had a heart surgery that I could never have afforded. Surgery that an anonymous benefactor paid for. Surgery that you paid for." The silence that had followed felt like it lasted years. I'd watched emotions flicker across his face. Shock, joy, anger, grief, and finally, a desperate kind of hope. "We have a daughter?" he'd whispered. "Lily?" I'd pulled out my phone, showing him picture after picture. Lily at the hospital, Lily taking her first steps, Lily blowing out birthday candles. His hands had shaken as he'd scrolled through them, tears streaming down his face. "She has my mother's eyes," he'd said, voice thick with emotion. "I can see it. My mother's eyes." "Tyler." "David," he'd corrected gently. "I go by David now." Tyler was the boy who believed in justice, in fairness, in love conquering all. David knows better. "David," I'd repeated, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. Why didn't you contact me directly when you found out we were alive? He'd laughed bitterly. I found out you were alive when your GoFundMe showed up in my newsfeed 3 months ago. One of my employees shared it. I saw your picture and I thought I was hallucinating. I've been having you watched since then, trying to figure out if it was really you, if I really had a daughter, if your father's lies went even deeper than I'd thought. And you paid for the surgery. Of course I did. I couldn't let my daughter die. Not when I had the means to save her. But I also couldn't reveal myself. Your father is still a federal judge. He has power, connections. If he knew I was alive, successful, and in contact with you, who knows what he'd do? I've been building a case against him for years, Emma, gathering evidence of his crimes. I was almost ready to expose him when you appeared. I'd pulled out the safety deposit box key then, placing it on his desk. You don't need to build a case. My grandmother already did. His eyes had widened as I'd explained about Grandma Rose's journals, about the evidence she'd hidden. By the time I'd finished, he was pacing the office, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. We can destroy him, he'd said finally. With this evidence and what I've gathered, we can destroy him completely. I don't care about destroying him, I'd said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I just want him to face justice, and I want our daughter to know her father. He'd stopped pacing, turning to look at me with such intensity I'd felt exposed. Do you really mean that? After everything? After I left you? Abandoned you when you needed me most? You didn't abandon me. You were driven away by lies, by my father's lies. I'd stood then, crossing to where he stood by the windows. David, I loved Tyler with everything I had, and looking at you now, seeing what you've become, what you've done with your pain, I think I could love David too, if you'll let me. He'd kissed me then, 5 years of grief and longing poured into that single moment. When we'd finally pulled apart, both breathless, he'd whispered, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Then come meet your daughter. The reunion between David and Lily had been everything I'd hoped for and more. She'd taken to him immediately, as if some part of her recognized him despite never having met him. Within minutes, she'd been showing him her drawings, telling him about her favorite books, climbing into his lap like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Are you my daddy? She'd asked, with the blunt honesty only a 3-year-old could manage. David had looked at me, seeking permission, and I'd nodded. Yes, sweetheart. I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry I haven't been here before now. That's okay, Lily had said, patting his cheek with her small hand. Mommy says sometimes people get lost, but the important thing is finding your way back. He'd cried then, holding our daughter like she might disappear if he let go. The next few weeks had been a whirlwind. David had insisted on moving us into a proper home. Not the mansion I'd expected, but a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard for Lily to play in. He'd been careful not to overwhelm us with his wealth, understanding that I needed to maintain some independence, some sense of self. But the confrontation with my family was inevitable. David had arranged everything with the precision of a military operation. He'd gathered all the evidence, Grandma Rose's documents, his own investigation, records of all the families my father had destroyed over the years. He'd hired the best prosecutors, ensuring that justice would be swift and unavoidable. But before he'd turned everything over to the authorities, he'd wanted to face my father directly. The meeting had been arranged at my parents' estate on a Sunday afternoon. They'd thought I was coming to introduce them to my new boyfriend, maybe finally seeking their approval after all these years. They had no idea that David Morrison, the son of the family my father had destroyed, was about to walk through their door. My mother had answered the door, her practiced smile freezing when she saw David beside me. Emma, darling, who is this? This is David Morrison, Mother. I think Dad knows who he is. The crash from the living room had been immediate. my father's whiskey glass shattering against the hardwood floor. We'd walked in to find him standing by the fireplace, his face pale, his hands trembling. Victoria and James were there too, looking confused. "Hello, Richard," David had said calmly. "I believe you knew my parents." "You're supposed to be—" my father had started, then stopped. "Dead, like you told me Emma was?" "No, Richard. Very much alive, and very much aware of what you did to my family." "I don't know what you're talking about," my father had blustered, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. $20 million, David had continued, pulling out a folder. $20 million you stole from my family's trust when you were the executor? $20 million that left my parents destitute, that led to my father's heart attack, my mother's breakdown. $20 million that you've been hiding in offshore accounts while building your career on the reputation of being an honest judge. Victoria had gasped. "Dad, what is he talking about?" "Lies," my father had said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is all lies." "Is it?" I'd stepped forward then, holding Grandma Rose's journal. "Because Grandma Rose didn't think so. She knew everything, Dad. She documented everything, and she left it all for me to find." I'd read from the journal then, Grandma Rose's words filling the room like a ghost seeking justice. With each entry, my father had seemed to shrink, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "This is entrapment," he'd finally said, grasping at straws. "This is illegal." "No," David had said. "This is justice. The FBI will be here in an hour. You can either come quietly or you can make a scene in front of all your neighbors. Your choice." My mother had sunk into a chair, her perfect composure finally shattered. "Richard, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't." But my father's silence was answer enough. Victoria had been the first to speak, her voice cold and sharp. "You let us defend you. You let us cut Emma out of our lives, called her a disappointment, a failure, while you were the criminal all along." "I did it for this family," my father had said desperately. "For all of you. To give you the life you deserved." "No," James had said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "You did it for yourself, and you let us become monsters in the process. Emma, God, I'm so sorry." But I hadn't been interested in their apologies. Not then. I'd taken David's hand and turned to leave, but my father's voice had stopped me. "Emma, please, you're my daughter." I'd turned back, meeting his eyes steadily. "I was your daughter when I begged you to save Lily's life. I was your daughter when I was working 3 jobs and sleeping in my car. I was your daughter when you told me I deserved to suffer for my choices, but you didn't care then. So why should I care now?" The FBI had arrived exactly on schedule. My father had been led away in handcuffs while the neighbors watched from their windows. My mother had stood on the porch, looking lost and broken, her perfect world in ruins. Victoria and James had tried to approach me, but I'd shaken my head. Not yet, maybe not ever. The trial had been swift. With the evidence we'd provided, there had been no defense. Richard Whitmore, the respected federal judge, had been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The stolen money had been recovered and returned to David's family trust, or what was left of it after my father's spending. My mother had filed for divorce before the trial had even ended. The family estate had been sold to pay restitution. Victoria had lost her job at the law firm. The scandal had been too much. James had been luckier, but his reputation had taken a hit he'd probably never recover from. And me? I'd finally found peace. David and I had taken things slowly, rebuilding our relationship with the knowledge of who we really were now, not who we'd been 5 years ago. He'd been patient, understanding that trust, once broken, even if not by his choice, took time to fully restore. But with each passing day, as I'd watched him with Lily, as we'd built a real family together, I'd fallen in love all over again. Not with Tyler, the boy who'd stolen my heart in a coffee shop, but with David, the man who'd survived tragedy and chosen to use his pain to help others. We'd gotten married on a beach in Maine, just the 3 of us and a justice of the peace. Lily had been our flower girl and ring bearer and enthusiastic audience all rolled into one. It had been perfect in its simplicity, free from the weight of expectations and appearances that had defined my childhood. David had continued his anonymous donations, but now I'd helped him choose the families. We'd read their stories together, remembering our own desperation, and we'd given them the miracle we'd been fortunate enough to receive. It had become our mission, our way of honoring both the suffering we'd endured and the second chance we'd been given. Lily had thrived with her new heart and her complete family. She'd started school, made friends, joined a soccer team, all things that had seemed impossible when she'd been fighting for every breath. Sometimes I'd watch her run across the playground, her laughter carrying on the wind, and I'd remember those dark nights in the hospital when I'd thought I'd never see her grow up. The letters from prison had started about a year after my father's incarceration. I'd thrown the first few away unopened, but eventually curiosity had won. They'd been what I'd expected. Self-pity dressed up as apology, requests for forgiveness without true acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused. I'd stopped reading them, but I'd kept them. Maybe someday Lily would want to know about her grandfather. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive, but not yet. Victoria had reached out too, tentatively, through emails and texts. She'd been seeing a therapist, she'd said, trying to understand how she'd become someone who could turn her back on her sister's dying child. She'd sent Lily birthday presents, which I'd accepted, though I hadn't been ready for face-to-face meetings. James had taken a different approach, volunteering at children's hospitals, trying to atone through action rather than words. I'd respected that more. My mother had disappeared entirely, moving to Europe to stay with distant relatives, unable to face the shame of her fall from grace. I'd felt sorry for her, in a way. She'd built her entire identity around being Mrs. Richard Whitmore, and without that, she'd had nothing left. But the most unexpected reconciliation had come from David's side. His mother, who'd been in assisted living since his father's death, had been told I was alive, that she had a granddaughter. The joy in her eyes when we'd visited had healed something in David I hadn't even realized was still broken. She'd held Lily for hours, whispering stories about David's father, about the family they'd been before everything had been stolen from them. She'd passed away 6 months later, but peacefully, knowing her son had found happiness, and that the family line would continue. It's been 3 years now since that terrifying night when I'd thought I'd lose Lily. 3 years since an anonymous benefactor who turned out to be the love of my life saved not just my daughter, but all of us. The scar down Lily's chest has faded to a thin silver line, a reminder of how close we'd come to tragedy and how far we'd traveled toward joy. We have another child now, a son named after David's father and my Grandma Rose. Rose William Morrison, a name that carries both our histories and our hope for the future. He's 6 months old and has his father's eyes and my stubborn chin. Lily adores him, constantly asking when he'll be big enough to play soccer with her. Sometimes, when I'm watching my family, David reading to Lily, baby Rose sleeping in his crib, the evening light streaming through our kitchen windows. I think about that girl who'd sat at a kitchen table covered in medical bills, certain her world was ending. I wish I could tell her that sometimes rock bottom is just the foundation for something better, that sometimes the people who should love you fail, but that doesn't mean you're unlovable, that sometimes miracles come disguised as tragedies and salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. I think about the other families we've helped, the children who've gotten their surgeries, their treatments, their second chances. Each one is a small rebellion against the philosophy my father had tried to instill in me, that people get what they deserve, that struggling means you're somehow worth less. Every child we save is proof that compassion matters more than judgment, that grace matters more than deserving. David's company has grown into one of the largest tech firms in the country, but he's never forgotten what it feels like to have nothing. 30% of the profits go directly to medical charities, and he's established a foundation specifically for families with sick children who've been abandoned by their support systems. We've named it the Rose Foundation, after the woman who'd seen the truth and made sure it would eventually come to light. The last time I'd seen my father was at his sentencing. He'd looked older, smaller, stripped of the authority that had once made him seem invincible. He'd tried to catch my eye, but I'd looked away. Not out of anger anymore, but out of indifference. He'd become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale about what happens when you choose pride over love, reputation over family. But I'd learned something else from him too, something he'd never intended to teach. I'd learned that the labels people give you, disappointment, failure, lost cause, only have power if you internalize them. I'd learned that sometimes the people who should support you won't, but that doesn't mean you're not worthy of support. I'd learned that rock bottom isn't a permanent address, but a temporary stop on the way to something better. Most importantly, I'd learned that love, real love, doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't require perfection or success or following someone else's plan for your life. David had loved me when I'd had nothing to offer but myself and a sick child. He'd loved me enough to save us even when he'd thought we could never be together. That's the kind of love worth believing in. Lily starts kindergarten next week. She's picked out her backpack, pink with unicorns naturally, and she's practiced writing her name 100 times. Lily Rose Morrison. She doesn't know the full story yet, about her grandfather in prison, about how her parents found each other again, about the anonymous benefactor who turned out to be her father. Someday we'll tell her, when she's old enough to understand, that families are complicated, that people can fail you and redeem themselves, that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose to build rather than the ones you're born into. But for now, she knows the only things that really matter. She is loved. She is healthy. She has a family that would move heaven and earth for her. And every breath she takes is a small miracle, paid for by love that refused to let her go. The doorbell rings, pulling me from my thoughts. David's ordering pizza for dinner, a Friday night tradition in the Morrison household. Lily races to the door, her feet pounding on the hardwood floors with the exuberance of a child who's never had to ration her energy. I follow more slowly, Rose balanced on my hip, watching my daughter charm the delivery driver into giving her extra Parmesan packets. This is our life now. Simple, chaotic, beautifully ordinary. No estates or galas or carefully maintained appearances. Just a family that fought through hell to find each other and daily chooses to keep fighting for others still trapped in their own dark nights. David catches my eye over Lily's head and smiles. That same crooked smile that had made me fall in love with him in a coffee shop a lifetime ago. But now it carries the weight of everything we've survived, everything we've built, everything we've chosen to become. "Mommy," Lily says, tugging on my shirt, "can we watch a movie tonight?" "Of course, baby. What do you want to watch?" "Something with a happy ending," she says decisively. "I like happy endings." I kiss the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, remembering when I'd thought we'd never get our happy ending. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. As we settle in for our Friday night, pizza boxes scattered on the coffee table, Lily wedged between David and me, Rose sleeping in his bassinet beside us, I think about all the families out there still struggling, still facing their darkest moments. Tomorrow, David and I will review the latest applications to the Rose Foundation. We'll choose another family to save, another child to give a second chance. It's become our purpose, our way of ensuring that no one else has to sit at a kitchen table covered in bills, feeling as alone and desperate as I'd once felt. But tonight, we're just us, the Morrisons, a family that shouldn't exist, built from lies and betrayal and abandonment, but somehow transformed into something beautiful through the alchemy of love and forgiveness and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The movie starts, something animated with singing animals that Lily's seen a dozen times, and she snuggles deeper between us, her small hand finding mine in the dark. David's arm comes around us both, pulling us close, and for a moment, I'm overwhelmed by the simple perfection of it all. This is what my father never understood, what my mother never grasped, what my siblings are only now beginning to learn. Success isn't measured in degrees or bank accounts or social standing. It's measured in moments like this, in the steady breathing of a child whose heart beats strong and sure, in the warmth of a partner who chose you not despite your struggles, but because of how you face them, in the quiet courage of building something real and lasting from the rubble of what was supposed to be. I was about to lose my daughter. Then a mysterious benefactor paid for her life-saving surgery. That benefactor turned out to be the father she'd never met, the love I'd thought I'd lost, the victim of my own father's crimes seeking justice and redemption in equal measure. It's a story that shouldn't have a happy ending, but somehow, against all odds, it does. And tomorrow, we'll make sure another family gets their happy ending too, because that's what you do when you've been pulled from the darkness. You become the light for someone else. You become the anonymous benefactor, the mysterious savior, the proof that miracles still happen, even in the darkest of moments, especially in the darkest of moments. The movie plays on, Lily's breathing deepens into sleep, and David presses a kiss to my temple. "I love you," he whispers, words we never take for granted anymore. "I love you too," I whisper back, meaning it with every cell in my body, every beat of my grateful heart. Outside, the world continues with all its injustices and inequalities, all its Richard Whitmores building success on others' suffering. But inside this small house, in this perfect moment, love has won. A family has been restored. A child has been saved. And that's enough, more than enough. It's everything. End. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true worth seen, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below. And tell me, what was the moment in the story that resonated with you the most? And if you want more powerful stories about finding your strength and overcoming the odds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.